Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cambridge Union. Tonight, I have a very difficult job. I have to present a presenter. Jeremy is well known for being a Radio 2 presenter, for being the presenter of Eggheads, but probably more famously from Strictly Come Dancing. He has just come from filming 67 episodes of Eggheads, but will be speaking about his career in journalism, about what he thinks about the media today, and actually, I'm not going to say anything else because he will do that for me. So please welcome Mr. Jeremy Vine.
Sorry, I just said, can I do a really dramatic entrance? So I wanted to stand out there, so forgive me for doing it. How is everybody? Are you okay? Good, you're feeling good? Stressed? You didn't say stressed, okay. Not a good start. So I just came down from Scotland. I was just doing 67 Eggheads, as was mentioned. And does anyone watch that show? Can I just check? And we had thank you, just two of you. And because we record 67 in 16 days, right? So we do about 5 a day. And I guarantee your mums and grandmas will watch, because mine do. And so the best question was, what was the name given to the event in 1908 in Siberia, which caused an explosion, the power of 1,000 Hiroshimas? What was the name of that event? Does anybody know? Brilliant. What did you say it again? Here we go.
Tunguska meteorite.
The Tunguska, fantastic, sir. The Tunguska, you were here in the universe just to answer that question on this particular night. Everything else is meaningless. So I just mentioned that, the Tunguska event, okay? So we think it was a meteorite, as you gentlemen said, and it knocked over 18 million Siberian trees, but no one was around, and they didn't even find the site till 4 years later. So that was all the quizzy stuff. But it made me think about the start of my career, and I thought I would, suddenly thought there were people on the balcony. No, there aren't. Sorry, freaked me out. I thought I should say about my first day at work. So, because you are all, I'm thinking 18, 19, 20, and I'm 50 now, but there was a time when I was 20 and 21, and I wanted to get into journalism. And this is the amazing thing, and I fear that this seems like a long-lost world, as I describe it. We had things in this country called newspapers when I was at university, and they actually had journalists on them, on the staff, and lots of them. And so, for example, we had the Cambridge Evening News. I know it's still going, but it would have had maybe 50, 60 journalists. The Coventry Evening Telegraph had 85 journalists on it. That's more than the Independent newspaper has now. It sold more copies in Coventry than the Independent does across the whole country now. So I thought, as a student who wants to get into journalism, I'm going to start applying to these newspapers. And I applied to Coventry. I'd never even been to Coventry. I went for an interview there, and I discovered they have 3 traineeships a year. You go on the staff with a pension if you get one of these traineeships, and they're desperate for us to apply because they haven't even got enough applications. I know I'm describing a long-lost world. And actually, I nearly didn't get the job because a fire alarm went off when I was being interviewed, and I took it as an excuse to go shopping in Coventry. I thought it's going to be hours, And when I came back, they'd been looking for me everywhere, and they said, "Where on earth have you been?" And I had to think very quickly, and I said, "I've been trying to find the source of the fire." It was a false alarm, and I was given a traineeship at the Coventry Evening Telegraph. And on my first day there, I vividly remember, so I'm 21, this is 1986, graduated from Durham University, sorry about that, and I was sent to Coventry railway station to interview a group of students dressed as bears who were raising money for the local hospital. And believe me, I'm nervous because all I've done is student newspapers and stuff, so I'm going to ask every question of these students. So I have a notepad, and I have, oh blimey, you're not going to jump, are you? Notepad, paper, I ask them everything, their ages, their names, what hospital they're raising money for, what the ward is, why they're doing it, how many of them are there, how much have they raised, what are they, et cetera, et cetera. I come back to the newsroom, and I give my copy to Jeff Grimmer, who is the deputy news editor of the Coventry Evening Telegraph, and he says to me, "Why were they dressed as bears?" I said, "I don't know. I didn't ask them." So he sent me back down to Coventry railway station to ask these students why they were dressed as bears, and the funny thing was that they didn't know either. But that was my first story. And I look around, that I can almost see the newsroom in my head now. It was manual typewriters, ladies and gentlemen. So it was, forget computers, they didn't have them. 3-ply paper, so you type and there's carbon. This is like describing something from another planet. I can see people glazing over and panicking, but there's carbon in between the bits of paper. And as you type, you print on 3 different pages. You take one and you spike it on your desk, and you take the other 2 and you give them to the news editor or the deputy news editor, Jeff Grimmer, who taught me 3/4 of everything that I know. And then he would spike one on his desk with a spike. And then he would physically, and this is the really amazing bit of technology, using his legs, he would walk the other thing to the sub-editors, who would then mark it up. They would roll it, and the most high-tech thing we had was a tube that you put the piece of paper into, and it would suck the piece of paper around to the other side of the building, where it would then be taken out of the tube by people who would set the type in metal on the printing presses. And then as I walked out the building, I saw my article on the front page or wherever come off the presses as I went to get my bike. And that was the Coventry Evening Telegraph in 1986. It's not even that long ago. It's not even 30 years ago. It's quite extraordinary when you think about it. 85 editorial staff, 3 trainees a year, 109,000 copies a day, 4 editions a day in Coventry, all sold by shouty men in hats on street corners, only 30 years ago. The first week I remember sent to cover a court case where a man was accused of running up to a woman in the park and shouting, "I want sex," and she fought him off with a shoe. And so I thought, well, I can't mess this story up. So I wrote the story, and I brought it back to Jeff Grimmer, and my story began, "A Coventry court heard today how a man ran up to a woman in the park and shouted, 'I want sex.'" And he put, without even hesitating, he put a line through it. He said, "That's not a story, because everyone wants sex." He said, the story is that she fought him off with the shoe." So I understood something absolutely primal about journalism in that instant. The story was that she fought him off with the shoe. That was the top line, and I'd missed it. And one day I was running down the stone steps at Coventry, and I tripped over some boxes at the bottom of the stairs because I was not looking where I was going. And I looked around, and these boxes had computers in them. And this would have been late 87 now. So I thought, this will be good, because the newspaper will bring in computers, and they may sell 110,000 copies a day. And they'll be able to print in color. They'll be able to have more journalists, more than 85. They'll be able to have more trainees, more than 3. Only now do we understand what disaster those machines spelled for the newspaper, ladies and gentlemen, because, of course, it wasn't just the newspaper that got computers. It was the readers who got the computers too. The computers allowed them to look elsewhere for news, and as a result, how many people are working on the Coventry Evening Telegraph now? 85? 9. 9 now. They're not in the great big building with the 4 floors and the Frankenstein Gothic font above the door. They're in a tiny little office out the city centre. The paper's printed 1 edition in Birmingham the night before. With all respect, it's gone. And the pain of that, I cannot describe. The pain of all these bright graduates that I was with at Durham who all wanted to become newspaper journalists didn't see it was coming to an end. Why didn't we spot it? It's just unbelievable to me. We're working on the student newspaper in 1985, and we cannot see that the brightest hour is just before night, and that the sky is going dark for newspapers. And I know that they still exist, and I'm not saying they're gone forever, but my goodness, newspaper foreign correspondents, that's now going to be like alchemists, these jobs that don't exist anymore, child chimney sweeps, knocker-uppers, who were the people who walked around with little cloths in balls on sticks to wake people up before they had alarm clocks. Bottom stoppers is another job that's gone now. Link boys, who used to take people around in fog in London, that's gone now. And newspaper foreign correspondents. It's very sad. We were just talking earlier about how we get our news, and we were all proudly saying that we get it off Twitter now. And it's very rare to buy a newspaper and so on. I completely understand that. You don't need to tell me that. I know. But of course, if you don't pay for it, then journalists don't get paid, and journalism doesn't really exist anymore. So I suppose if I had one piece of advice that comes out of my Coventry Evening Telegraph story, it would be to be flexible. Because I should have realized when I tripped over the computers that the newspaper was about to do exactly the same thing. And I didn't realize. And I think for you guys, there will be people here who want to go into journalism or whatever. Let's call it the media, because the media will still exist, and powerfully so. You have to be single-minded but extremely flexible, as I failed to be. I was just lucky, because I joined the BBC, and the BBC is still going strong. And I was going to tell you about, we can talk about Strictly at some point if you want, and I won't try and recreate my tango in this room, because it wouldn't be right from health and safety purposes. But I was very lucky. I joined the Beeb, and I was a trainee for 2 years, and I always wanted to broadcast. And the newspaper thing was great for me, and I loved it, but broadcasting was really where it was at. And I became South Africa correspondent at one point. And I wanted to tell you about this lady called Paulina. When I was the South Africa correspondent, and this might strike you as very strange, we had a maid. And the BBC reporters always paid for this maid privately called Paulina, who was a poor black South African, as you'd expect, and an absolutely wonderful person. And after a while, I went to 18 African countries in 3 years as the correspondent, and I suddenly realized that Paulina was more interesting than all the other stories. And I remember once I saw, just to give you a sort of portrait of her, I saw the movie Titanic, and at the time I thought it was really good. And I said, Paulina, you must go and see Titanic. And I bought her a couple of tickets for the cinema to take her boyfriend. And a few days later, I saw her, and I said, did you enjoy Titanic? And she said, it was okay, but it was very violent. And I said, violent, Paulina? Okay. And then I just sort of, something struck me, and I said, was there a ship in this film, Paulina? And she thought about it, and she said, no, there was no ship. And it turned out she'd been to see a film called Hoodlum, because it had roughly the same number of letters in the title. And I realized that, because there's a literacy issue there, she wouldn't be able to identify which film was Titanic and which film was Hoodlum, so she went to the wrong film. So I thought that's my Western construct going on to her life, and an epic fail by me. But her great proud thing was her son, Matthias. And so for Paulina, she'd been through apartheid, and she'd got through the Mandela presidency and so on. She had this brilliant son who was completely with the new South Africa, whose name was Matthias, and he was 18 years old, very handsome lad, and he used to come around occasionally, and he was very inspired by the BBC local staff who were great journalists, the South Africans. And one day he was killed in a car crash, which is sort of the way that young people died in South Africa when I was there. When political violence was over, it was trouble on the roads. And you can imagine that was almost the end of Paulina's life, because she had nothing else to live for. And she had to write this address for the funeral, and she was completely in pieces. And so she said to me, could you help me write the address? And of course, I, as the foreign correspondent, thought, that is what I'll be good at. I'll be able to write the address, and I'll be able to sum up what she thinks, because that's what I'm paid to do. And I hadn't really realized that actually she was far better placed to write it than me. And we sat down at my computer, and she sat next to me, and I said, well, why don't you just start telling me what you want to say? And I thought, well, I will put it into some words that can be read out. And she completely blew me away with what she wrote. And I have the full address, and I won't give you the full thing. It's quite extraordinary. But the one phrase in it that I'll always remember is she says, I will miss Matthias because he was always calling me Mum, and no one will call me Mum anymore. And when I wrote that, I thought, that's incredible, the power of that. It's more powerful than anything I've ever written, and I'm supposed to be the professional writer here. But of course, I have to put a tie on before I can broadcast. But she is giving me that line from the heart. And I thought about that again this last couple of days, because what's so powerful about what Paulina said there is that it was real. And as a Radio 2 presenter, we've obviously lost Terry Wogan in the last couple of days, who's our most successful presenter of all time, without question. And a lot of people say, how was he such a great broadcaster? What was his technique? And we could talk a bit about what made his technique so good, but fundamentally, he was good because he was real, because the Wogan you heard on the air was the real person. You thought you're listening to a really nice guy and a generous, warm spirit, and it really was him. And so again, if I had any, I've already said be flexible in your careers. My other piece of advice would be to seek out what is real. You see this in politics a lot, that the people who come out of the screen at you, whether it's Corbyn or Boris Johnson or even Anne Widdecombe, bless her, who exist in 3 dimensions, are actually not drilled and spun, and they're not on an autocue, they're real. And the premium in life is on what is real. And as I left South Africa, I mean, I got very close to Paulina because she'd had her tragedy, and I didn't have the happiest time there either myself. And I left South Africa, and I was being driven to the airport by Milton, the producer. And after about 100 yards, I said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, Milton, I've got to go back and say goodbye to Paulina properly, because I haven't said goodbye properly." So I went back to the house, and there's Paulina in the kitchen. She was crying. And I said, I feel I haven't said goodbye to you, and it just meant so much to me to get to know you, and I realized that you're more interesting than all the stories I've done. So I did this kind of completely ludicrous farewell, you know. And she just said, "Jeremy, you have become my father and my son." I thought, boom, that's bigger than and better than anything I could say. And again, I will never forget that. So she had a premium on the real. And the real is very, very precious. When I was in South Africa, let's just tarry on this for a moment. So we're in about 1999. I'm 34. I had done 4 years at Westminster because I thought that was the most exciting place to be. And then when I went to Africa, I thought, no, Westminster wasn't real. That's the problem. That actually in Africa, you're interviewing people who've never seen a microphone before. That's what a scoop is. It's not some cabinet minister who's forgotten his lines for the morning and says what he doesn't mean. It's meeting someone who's never seen a tape recorder. That's a scoop. And we had this woman turn up at the bureau who was on some weird European placement called Cecilia. And we didn't even know she was coming. It was a classic BBC thing. She just turned up one day and said she was supposed to be working with us. And we didn't know what to ask her to do. And so she's about 25. She's Swedish, Chilean combination, interesting combination. And she asked to be put to work, and all I could think of was that she should, and this is, I don't know how you'd feel about doing this actually if this was you, because I think this is quite a big ask of her, but I said, look, can you approach the police in Johannesburg, who were dealing with a phenomenal number of violent crimes. I mean, they had, in 99, they had 25,000 murders a year. We had 700, and they've got more people living in the country. I said, and just see if you can film them doing their job. See if you can go out at night and just film them at work. So Cecilia, bless her, said yes. And again, maybe that's a good lesson for all of us to say yes to everything in the early stages. And she went out with this camera and she filmed them. And of course, you know, you can imagine what happened. She's working in the night. We're working in the day. We hardly ever see her. She comes in the morning, really tired. She puts her tape on the desk. Off she goes to sleep, gets up. About a month later, there's a whole pile of tapes. No one's looked at them. And I thought, and she was just busily doing this thing of filming the police. And I thought, well, we better look at these tapes. And we couldn't believe what was on the tapes when we saw them. We couldn't believe the sort of random violence and cruelty of the police as they arrested people, even though they're driving around with a BBC person with a camera. Whether they forgot she was there or they were showing off to her, I don't know. But we got so much stuff we didn't even know what to do with it. And we thought, well, this is going to cause a real problem for Mandela, who was the president, and all kinds of repercussions. And we weren't even sure where to put it on the air, but the upshot was we did this film for Newsnight. And the film showed one particular sequence where the police track down this car that's fleeing them. They roll it off the road. They pull everyone out of it. They stub cigarettes out on their heads. And then they set their dogs on them and just terrify them and then arrest them. And one of them dies later and so on. So it caused a massive, massive scandal. It's the first time and only time in my life when I'll do a film. And Nelson Mandela, has to give a press conference about my film. So that probably won't happen again. But it was extraordinary. There were 22 police officers who were suspended as a result. The office got a bomb threat. The piece won awards. Cecilia, first job in journalism, cleans up. Absolutely brilliant. And for us, it was like, oh my goodness, what a story. They're beating everybody up. So that's the story. 3 weeks later, I get a call in the bureau. And the joy of working as a foreign correspondent is you're not just constantly chasing. You actually have moments where you can follow things up. And this guy says, hello, Mr. Vine. My name is Johann Schmidt, and I am at home, and I want to tell you my story. So I said, well, is this going to be worth me hearing? He said, yes, but you must come and speak to me directly. So I said to my colleagues, okay, I'm going to go. I don't know what this is about. I'm going to go see this guy. And I go around to this guy's house, white South African, as you can gather from the accent, Afrikaner. He said, Mr. Vine, let me tell you what happened to me. I was driving my car through the center of Johannesburg. And I stopped at some lights. I was on my way to a party. And there was a knock on the window, and there are two guys out there, and one of them had a gun, and they're taking my car from me. And I got out the car, and then one of them gets in the car and says, hurry up, but the other one says, wait, I've got to shoot him first. And he puts the gun to my forehead, and he pulls the trigger, and it just clicks. And then he starts shaking the gun like it's some sort of a Coke can or something, or it's a broken toy, and he thinks he's mended it, and he puts it to my head again, and he pulls the trigger again, and it just clicks. And then the other guy shouts, get in the car, and they drive off. And you know when I saw my car again, Mr. Vine? When it appeared on your film. And those guys who did that were run off the road by the police, and they had cigarettes stubbed in their head, and the dogs were set on them, and that's exactly what they deserved. He said, so where is your story now? I thought, okay, I'm going to have to think about this. And to be honest, that's 15 years ago. I'm still thinking. Because we did put that on the air, but it was lost in the wash. You know, that first-person account of, I'm the guy whose car, no one was interested. But so, emanating from that, I would offer one other piece of advice, which that things are not always as simple as they seem for you people who become journalists here. I'm sure you'll be brilliant, but the philosopher Bertrand Russell told the story of the coffee table. He said, I know the coffee table is a fixed shape, but when I walk around it, it changes shape. So what I am seeing is not the coffee table. And stories are like that. They change depending on how you look at them. And I don't now, all I can say is that I kind of regret the award-winning story because I feel it was based on a false premise. That's all I can say. So I wound up on Radio 2 via Newsnight and some other things. And this is my last real thing before I'll take some questions from you guys. Let me just check. How are we doing? Oh, we're good. And I learned the biggest lesson of all when I arrived on Radio 2. So what happened was this. I was a reporter, and I presented on Newsnight, and I always thought that the way that news works is that some clever people go into a room, and they decide what the news is, and then we tell people what the news is. And then when I arrived on Radio 2, I realized I got it completely the wrong way around, that we go into a studio, and we ask people what the news is, and they tell us. So I wrote down some of the these are great comments that we've had from Radio 2 listeners, right? So we realized that the show is not, in case you don't listen, it's 12 o'clock every day, Radio 2, and it's basically, hi everybody, it's me, we're going to play some music, what's going on? And then they call in, and they're usually really angry about something. So we run a story suggesting wind from cows is responsible for more global warming than air travel, with experts saying we can save the planet by becoming vegetarian. Mick from Kent says, quite the opposite. If cows are causing that much trouble, the only way forward is for us to eat them. There's a kind of a rude one here. I don't know if I should say this. I messed up because in broadcasting you always need to be crystal clear about two things: what the other person is saying to you and what you are saying yourself. And we were doing an item on fires in thatched cottages in Hampshire. 6 thatched roofs had caught fire in the space of 2 weeks. And we booked to speak to a woman called Pauline, who is quite posh from Buckinghamshire, and she has a thatched roof, and she's concerned that her neighbor's bonfire could set fire to it if the wind changes, okay? So far, so good. But I didn't know that the word thatch has more than one meaning. I had a sheltered childhood, and no one told me in Cheam that thatch is a slang term for a lady's most private area. I didn't know that. So when Pauline in Buckinghamshire said she was worried that her neighbor's bonfire might set light to her roof, I naturally asked, and what would happen if a spark flew into your thatch? And straight away I saw I had about 100 messages on Twitter saying, ha, 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 get the radio on now. And Pauline didn't help because she replied, if my thatch caught fire, my husband would get the hose out. When Labour were in power, we had Alan Johnson in the studio while he was Health Secretary answering questions about the NHS and chiefly what was then the new £780 million government drive against obesity. And callers were coming on the line with the usual things, criticisms and so on, saying it's not enough or the policy's wrong or it's not the government's job to stop people eating Kentucky Fried Chicken, that kind of thing. And the editor then says in my headphones, we've got Gloria from Rotherham on the line. And I say, Gloria, good afternoon, you're through to the Prime Minister. You're through to Alan Johnson. And she says, hello, Health Secretary. And he replies, yes. And Gloria says, if you give obese people £780 million, they're just going to spend it on food. We do an item about how people in cul-de-sacs tend to be heavier than average, overweight. Eddie from Somerset rings, says, this research cannot be true. I live on a main road and I'm fat. But probably the best moment actually was during you might even remember this, during the 2010 election. And what had happened, we were due to interview Gordon Brown as he was obviously Prime Minister at the time, for the big election interview, Radio 2. And unusually, he was not going to be able to be in the studio with us. He was going to be, we were told, out and about with voters in Manchester because he needs to give people a good time. That was what we were told. And I was a tiny bit cross because you're interviewing as a contact sport, so you want to see the person. So I said, could the editor just ask Labour, could we just have a camera when he goes into our Manchester studio? Just a little camera there so I can see him, like a webcam, not even for broadcast. And Labour said, no, absolutely no cameras at all. So the day came, and we had, with these interviews, election interviews, a lot of sort of planning and stuff, and we had about half an hour, and it was all the banks and the crisis and all of that. And he came into the studio, and just as I was introducing him, the editor said in my headphones, he's been rude to a woman in Rotherham. I'll get the details. Now, I knew nothing at all about this, but what had happened, and you will know. Who knows the name of the lady, by the way? I know you will, sir, the Tunguska man over there. Yes. Brilliant. Gillian Duffy. So he was out and about with this woman in Rotherham, out and about meeting voters, and he'd had this exchange with Gillian Duffy, and he had then been recorded calling her a bigot when he didn't know that the microphone was on him. Anyway, so I didn't know any of that. No one knew any of that. He didn't even know he'd been recorded or anything. So when the editor says to me he's been rude to a woman in Rochdale, isn't it? Sorry. I'll get the details. I think, well, as an interviewer, there's nothing I can do with that. I mean, I can't say to him, I gather you've been rude to a woman in Rochdale. There's just not enough information there, because he can just say no. So I pressed on. I just pressed on with the banks, and for 20 minutes. And I could see a lot of stuff going on the other side of the glass. The editor was obviously getting information, but I didn't know what it was. And then he came through with a piece of paper, and it simply said, her name was Gillian Duffy. He called her a bigot. So I think, okay, now I've got enough to be going on with. So I say to the Prime Minister, as he then was, I gather you've just called a woman in Rochdale a bigot. And he replies, and I could tell he was in trouble, well, if I ever was to use a phrase in that sort, it would be regrettable, and it certainly would not be the kind of thing I would be using. I thought, okay, game on here. As he's talking, in front of me on this screen where we have our radio clips, up pops a soundbite which is labeled Duffy Bigot Clip. So I say, well, I've got the clip here, let's hear it. And you know the clip, you hear him in his car, and he's saying, who put me with that woman? She was just a sort of a bigoted woman. And then the thing goes, he gets out of range and you lose it. And we go back to him, and he's completely lost it now and sounds very confused. We do a little bit about hung parliament, and that's the end of the interview. And I think, well, that's an amazing bit of radio. So I go through to the editor. We put on a record, it being Radio 2. And I say to the editor, that was an amazing piece of radio. And he says, no, it wasn't radio. It was TV. He said, as soon as you mentioned Gillian Duffy's name, all the three screens for the three main channels cut suddenly to a picture of him in the studio. And when you played in the clip, he kind of went backwards like that and then forwards with his head in his hands like he'd been shot. And this clip of him doing that went around the world. It was played on the Today Show in America. Jon Stewart played it, and then watch this clip. You can actually see the moment a man's political career leaves his body. And to this day, I mean, obviously it went completely crazy, and that moment, as it happens, turned out to symbolize the end of Labour in power after, let's think, 13 years, with Brown with his head in his hands. But for the life of me, as a BBC person, and I've been there nearly 30 years now, I didn't know how the camera got in the studio. I mean, we'd been absolutely told very clearly we couldn't even have a webcam in there. So how we ended up with a camera in there, and it ended up connected to the wall in an organization where anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and then it's actually patched through at the right moment live to create a sensational live moment. Nick Robinson said he never had such a wealth of material as he had that night to put together for his package for the 10 o'clock news. How that happened, I didn't know. And I was kind of puzzling over this. And we got closer and closer to election day. And I do the graphics for the general election, so the 3D virtual graphics. And so I was in the studio in 2010 with David Dimbleby. And he introduced me to this guy who he said was, I think, something like Deputy Head of Premises Operations Facilities Management. And I said to this guy, help me out with something. We were told no cameras, and yet there was a camera in there, and it filmed him, and he'd said no camera. Are we allowed to do that? And he said, oh yeah, it's absolutely cast iron rule at the BBC that you are allowed to film on BBC premises at all times, 24/7. I said, well, how long has that been a rule? He said, about 8 days. So that's as much of an explanation as I ever got for the Brown incident. But you know, it came back to that thing of the smallest voice being the most powerful. That actually, isn't it brilliant that we can have an election campaign that suddenly pivots on the voice of a pensioner who went out to buy a loaf of bread. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming. You could by all means ask questions. I'm delighted. I've got a clip I can play you of. Should I play you one of my listeners? Should we do that? Okay, just very quickly here. This is a guy who rings in. This is Dale from Pontypridd. And he rings in about during the Scottish referendum about why, and this is kind of a comment about Miliband, you have to watch out for, but it's the leaders are going up to Scotland and they shouldn't be. Here we go.
And it is no good the leaders rushing north. They are just going to push the yes vote over the line. The Scots see Miliband as weak as watered down whiskey. During this coalition, he's been as much use to traditional Labour voters as a boil on the scrotum. He's been absolutely
I think that is broadcastable. I mean, I think it's broadcastable. Anyway, any questions on anything? I don't mind. You can ask anything. Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to know what it was like to work with all the graphics at the election, because they seem to suddenly come and be all new and interesting. I wonder what it was like to actually be within them or walking across the UK as you were.
Oh, well, great question, because it's close to my heart, all that. And my broadcast hero is Peter Snow, who did it before me. And the answer is, so this is the swingometer we're talking about here. And in 1970, when a guy called Bob Mackenzie did it, the swingometer, you got to imagine, was actually just an arrow on a nail. And there was a surge to Edward Heath in the 1970 election. And as Bob Mackenzie, he was standing here talking about it, a guy had to come on with a paint pot and paint extra percentages in up the side on camera. I mean, that was amazing. And I just thought, as I did it in 2015, I thought how amazing it is and how it's changed. And the answer is, honestly, it's the joyful thing. Well, first of all, on the election, obviously, it was calamitous for the pollsters, which makes it very exciting for us, because we ideally, as broadcasters, we want the result to be unknown. There were 90 polls before the election, and 89 were wrong. And at 9:30 on election night, we had to go into this room to hear the results of the exit poll done by Professor John Curtis, who is a genius. And the people in the room were Nick Robinson, who was just getting his voice back after his operation, Emily Maitlis, who was also doing some numbers, obviously David Dimbleby and his producer, Tony Hall, the Director General. And then the phone rang on the table, and it was this guy, John Curtis, who said, "This is the result of the general election." And so he's such certainty, this guy, you know. So bear in mind, it's 9:30. The polls don't close till 10 o'clock. Had any of us tweeted it, we would have been in jail. So you really can't say anything until 10. And he went through, and he was basically bang on. And because everybody had said that Labour were neck and neck with the Conservatives, we couldn't believe that he had them on about 232 seats, and and Conservatives on about 321, actually went up to 332. So almost 100 seats ahead. So the sensation of that was the most exciting thing, firstly. So that, you know, it's going, Dimbleby starts, he says, "I've got the result in an envelope of our exit poll." He opens the envelope, he reads it, the sensation of that at 10 o'clock. I mean, no one can say politics is dull. They're crazy if they ever say that. And then he says to me, "Okay, Jeremy, show us what the House of Commons will look like." And that's where I answer your question. So what they do is, forgive me, you'll know about VR, but I'll just explain this for those who don't. I stand in the studio. The studio is 4 times the size of this room. And I stand in an area which is totally green, right up as high as that ceiling, actually. And where the camera sees green, it replaces it with graphic. So that's kind of the simple bit. Now, in the olden days with Peter Snow, they moved obviously beyond the paint pot and all that. They moved to the graphic being something that was behind me. They then began to put the graphic in front of me or behind me, but one or the other. And now they've been able to put it in both positions. And if the camera's there and I move like that, everything moves around me as the perspective changes. And the camera does it, and I hope this is not too technical, by a sort of GPS thing that communicates with the ceiling and tells it where it is in relation to this imaginary graphic. So I have to know where all that stuff is. I can't actually see it. So I have to know that when I go like that, that's Crosby there. So if I had my slides with me, I'll show you it all. But the joy of it is this. For the first time in history, I actually look like I was in Downing Street. So in days gone by, we've always said, "And Peter Snow joins us from Downing Street." Or even in 2010, "Jeremy Vine's in Downing Street." And you know it's not Downing Street. This time, it was so real that we started getting complaints because it was obviously nighttime Downing Street, but I was still there in the morning. So viewers were complaining that obviously my input to the program had been pre-recorded because it was still night. And I then had to come on and say, "This is just a graphic." So we've gone, you know, the uncanny valley where they say that it looks so real but not quite real enough that your brain starts tripping. Who's seen Polar Express here? Has anyone seen it? So they're very close to Tom Hanks in Polar Express, but because they're 2 degrees away from Tom... Oh, sorry, that's another clip. Because they're just 2 degrees away from Tom Hanks, your brain keeps saying it's not Tom Hanks. Here, we've gone the other side of it, and it now looks like Downing Street. And to be able to move in 3 dimensions. But of course, we need to not overuse it, but it is a joyful thing. Yeah, thank you for your question. Glad we covered the graphics. There's the graphics, there's Newsnight, there's Radio 2, Strictly. I want to do Strictly. Yes. You can shout. Should we, hang on, while you get the microphone, let's just play the clip that nearly fired there. This is another listener who's ringing to say that she gets... It's a form of tinnitus where you hear actual music.
Had ear trouble, a lot of trouble in my ears.
So have you been hard of hearing for a while?
Pardon?
Sorry, that's so childish of me. Anyway.
How do you deal with politicians who won't answer the question?
I think... Yeah. You know, in the end, you can't. I mean, if they don't, you know, all you can do is identify to the listener, who knows already that they're not answering. I sort of think maybe that's going out of vogue now, actually. I think that whole spin thing is really 90s. And if you look at whatever you think of Corbyn, when he came on my show last, my goodness, he answered every question. And the listeners loved him for it. They may not support him or vote for him, I don't know, but they thought they were so refreshed by somebody answering the questions. So I think that, how do we deal with it? We can't, if they don't want to answer the question, they won't do it. But there is such fatigue now of politicians evading. There really, really is. And I think the market's turning. I mean, before I was in Africa, I'd take a slightly roundabout route to your point here. I was at Westminster for 4 years, so I was a political correspondent, the most fun you can have without laughing. I joined in 1993. So I was 93, 97. So it was obviously Conservative government, John Major, and then Blair came in and I left and went to Africa because I sort of realized that politics was over. But during the Major government, it was basically an employment creation scheme for political journalists, as far as I can tell, because there were so many stories. So it was myself, I was very junior, Hugh Edwards, John Sopel, John Sargent was there, Mark Mardell, Nick Robinson was there. It was a really great team to be a part of. But Labour had finally worked out, as they saw it, that they needed to professionalise their communication. And the pressure they put on us was unbelievable. And it was almost emotional pressure as much as it wouldn't just get shouted at, you'd get befriended and then shouted at. You'd be given a story and then it would be taken away, Remember, walking down a House of Commons corridor and there's this figure of Peter Mandelson in this shadowy area up against one of the wooden panelled walls, a bit like here, and he's beckoning to me, and it was during a scandal over Harriet Harman's choice of a selective school for her child. And Mandelson just beckons me like that, and he says, I know what you want, and you're not getting it. And I said, well, what is it you think I want, Peter? And he said, you want Harriet to resign, and she's not going to. I said, actually, the BBC doesn't have a view on Harriet Harman's future. And he said, I don't mean the BBC, Jeremy, I mean you. I saw him at a party conference once, and I was just sort of joking in a slightly naive way. I said, oh, hi, Peter, spinning, are we? Having a bit of fun operating the puppet strings? And he said, excuse me, Jeremy, can I just make it absolutely clear? I'm here as a Labour politician to support my leader. I don't spin, I don't manipulate, I'm not the Prince of Darkness. His phone went off at that point. He said, excuse me. And he started listening. He went, this must be diffused. Like that. And I was, when I was in South Africa as the correspondent, Blair came out on a visit. And I observed a particular thing that really made me think. And he came out with all the lobby. And I remember him coming out to see, because he obviously recognized me from Westminster, and said, hi, Jeremy, how are you doing? All right, you must love it out here. That's a brilliant kind of way of just getting you on side, And there was a story that he didn't like that was going around, and Campbell was there, Alistair Campbell. And the story was that Cherie Blair had been on a beach, and she'd been sunbathing, and they got a lot of pictures of her, and they weren't very flattering, and she was very upset, and there was these headlines about Cherie's cellulite and all of that kind of thing. And I mean, it is a terrible reflection on our press, really, but that's all, because I was the Africa correspondent, I thought they'd all come over and want to talk about Africa, and they were all talking about Cherie Blair's cellulite. And Alistair Campbell had to kill the story. And I watched, he did it brilliantly. We were all on this plane going from Cape Town to Johannesburg, and he moved around the journalists, and he said, look, don't pass this on, but the Prime Minister saved someone's life while he was on holiday. And the journalists start going, you heard this story about, and it turned out the story was that Blair was on in a dinghy off the coast of Denmark. A Danish businessman had been drowning, and while conducting a cabinet reshuffle on his mobile, Blair had saved his life by pulling him into the boat. And this story, of course, goes around the whole plane. Sorry. This woman's now made 3 appearances. The story goes around the plane. When it lands, everyone gets off the plane and files the story. And I'm kind of thinking that this is terrible. I could see we're being played here, but there's no way around it. And Hugh Edwards was there, and he was supposed to be interviewing Blair. So he for a pool interview. So he goes into the room with Blair, and he asks him questions about Africa and all this sort of key stuff. And then he says, okay, Prime Minister, just got to ask you about this story that's emerging now, which is that you saved the life of a Danish businessman on holiday by pulling him into your dinghy. And Blair requests a pause in the interview and then turns to Campbell and says, is this one of yours? And he then gives this answer, which is, to be honest, anyone would have done the same. I mean, I can't claim any credit for it, completely non-answer. And I realized we'd all been done, but, then it moves on, the Cherie story's gone, job done for Alistair Campbell. And I kind of watched it because I was they all went back to London. I was in Africa, and I thought, I can't believe that. We've been completely done there. And 2 weeks later, there's a story. This Danish businessman had emerged, and to complain about the way this story had been told. He said that all that happened, he was swimming past Blair's boat, and he waved. And Blair invited him in, and he said no. And that was the story. And that became, Blair saved somebody's life while doing a cabinet reshuffle on a mobile. And I thought that is at the high watermark of sort of manipulation. And I think that's come to an end. I think so. I don't think there's any tolerance for it now. This woman's going to fire off again, isn't she? I've got a great... Shall I give you a little Wogan clip while we're talking? Because I feel like we lost a great guy. So this is... let me just see if I can find this. Obviously, Terry started doing The Breakfast Show on Radio 2 when I was 6 years old and finished when I was 44. So it's nearly 40 years, but he had an 8-year break for TV. And it was completely irreverent. So what's happening here is Terry's in the studio, and he's got the travel reporter, and for some reason, there's some innuendo thing going on with a reference to the mounted police, right? So this is what happens.
Convention has arrived again. Oh, you've noticed then, IC9 is off to LA. Probably a good job you're not coming. The police have been in Leicester. They've been listening to your show to gain intelligence. You get no intelligence here. They know that Boggy's intending to travel by train and will be the worse for wear when he was arrived. They expect more will arrive with him. The police are providing a reception committee, including the mounted police.
Oh, really? It's a good trick, isn't it?
So shave your beard off. They always get their men, the mounted.
In Fife. Oh, this is ridiculous. In Fife. Oh, dear. The M90 is fully open again, southbound, just north of Junction 2, Pit Reefy, following an accident. Traffic could take some time to recover. Not just the traffic. On the A720 Edinburgh City Bypass, a breakdown is causing problems for westbound traffic. There's one lane. There's one lane blocked just before Straight.
Oh, no. I'll tell you what.
No, I'll be all right.
Will you?
Yeah, I'll be all right.
Oh, no, just a minute.
When traffic is
I'll give you
taking
mouth
back...
to mouth.
For heaven's sake, traffic is tailing back towards the Sheriff Hall roundabout. Big Dennis tipped us off about that. In South Lanarkshire, the A7... Last time I did this was today in Parliament. In South Lanarkshire, the A702 is closed to all traffic just south of Biggar. Actually...
No, it's not going to work. I'll tell you what. You play a bit of music.
Yes.
What do you think? Get it on.
I don't know. What was the secret of that great broadcaster? I don't know. I always think that, if you are looking at the 5 greatest music broadcasters in the history of the microphone in this country, I would myself put a guy called Kenny Everett as number 1. Incredible innovator when I was a teenager. Number 2, John Peel. And so when I was your age, he was the guy who played all the stuff nobody else was playing. And I'd go 3 Wogan, but I think, maybe Wogan's number 1. Wogan, Chris Evans, Steve Wright. That's the top 5. And up until Saturday, you'd be able to say that of the 5 greatest music broadcasters ever, the living 3 were on Radio 2. And I had a friend who was meeting me for a drink a couple of years ago, and he was a university friend, and we met at 5, and he met me in reception, and Terry was there. So I said, Simon, please meet Terry Wogan. There we are. How nice you've met, this is really good. And then I took my friend up to the studios, and at the time, Steve Wright was doing the afternoon show, as he is now, but Chris Evans was doing the drive time show. So it just was at that changeover. So Steve was coming out, and he's been on the air for 38 years. So I said, Steve, this is my friend Simon Shepherd, you know. And then I went through to see Chris's show, and Chris was doing his thing, and he said, "Oh, Jeremy, why is it? Come in, where are you going down the pub? You're not drunk, are you?" So we become a little bit of zoo radio in Chris's show, my friend Simon and I. And I said to my friend Simon, you know, isn't that amazing? Of the 5 greatest of all time, 3 are still alive, and you've just met all 3 of them. Isn't that incredible? And he said, let's go down the pub, because he's an investment banker, so he's not interested in other people. But I do think that is amazing. Does anyone else want to ask a question? What time? We're good for time? Yeah, we've got about 9 minutes. Yes, Gillian Duffy, that was a good call. You like politics, I can tell. Yeah. Oh, really? Right, which did they win?
Episode 69.
They won?
Oh, yeah.
How much did they win?
14,000.
Oh, great. Was I presenting that?
Yes.
Okay, because it could have been Dermot Monahan, yeah.
But I was just wondering what your most memorable experience has been since you've been on the program.
Hands up if you don't watch Eggheads and you don't know it at all, because I just want to... the Tunguska man. Okay. All right, so just to explain for you guys, it's 5 people are there every day who are the Eggheads, and they're brilliant, like you, sir. They're brilliant quizzers. They know what the Tunguska event is. Every day they take on 5 public teams like your dad, and every day that the Eggheads win, we add another £1,000. So it's kind of, you know. So, for example, we had someone win 15 grand 3 days ago. So, and it's beautiful, because I think we love to quiz in this country. And so we had a great one where we had, I think the guy was, I don't know if he was Oxford or Cambridge, but he's one of the cleverest people we've ever had. And the first question was, he was a professor of philosophy, so he knew everything. And the first question he got was, what color is Noddy's hat? And his glasses went like that, because he had no way of even registering the question. Who knows? It's not red, no, it's blue. Sorry, you're not going to be in the final. So, here's what's interesting. We were just having a little moment, and it's very dangerous, this is the BBC, where we said, oh my goodness, we are going to become the longest running quiz in the history of British TV quite soon. We think it might be within our grasp. We've done 1,500 shows every single day, day in, day out. You know, it's there. We had a bit of a wobble a couple of years ago where I think they were thinking of ending it, and then they didn't. The figures are great. The show is great. But it's such a quiet success story. It's because, you know, half the room hasn't even heard of it. So I sort of, the space we're in is a beautiful space, but it is something about British quizzing. And I'm not a very good quizzer myself. I mean, I mentioned the Tunguska event. Let me try this with you, sir, because you got that. What is the name of the purple Teletubby? No idea. See, having both answers is the key to quizzing. Anyone know? Tinky Winky. You're wasted here. So that was another question that came up. You've got to know your kings and queens. Listen, get a team together and please play. It's in Glasgow. You come up. It's great fun. We love having the younger teams because there's so much more energy than retired, you know, accountants. And you will enjoy it, I promise, if you come up. It's a joyful thing. But the Eggheads are very good. The Eggheads are very good. I mean, we had a thing where Kevin Ashman is the most knowledgeable Egghead, and I think probably the most knowledgeable person in the English-speaking world. He's extraordinary. He knows everything. He knows everything. So the question was, what is the name of the software pioneer who went on the run from the police in South America in 2012? Anyone know that? Yes. Good. And Kevin didn't know, but he thought it's probably McAfee, but is it Robert or John? And he went round, and he just got John from somewhere in his head. I don't know how he did it. That's good. Good answer. The joy of quizzing. But in the end, you've got to know who came first, Edward III or Richard II. If you don't know that, you have not got a chance. Not a chance. Kings and queens and the periodic table. But then they're all crazy in a lovely way. I know I'm being filmed, and I'm obviously aware of that. But C.J. DeMoy is the famous one, right? Young guy, chess champion, sort of annoying. I said to him, okay, he loves films. So I said, okay, let me test you. Tootsie, the movie Tootsie. How many Oscars? He told me. Main star, supporting actors and actresses, he told me all of them. Who wrote it? He told me. Who wrote the screenplay? He told me. Who wrote the music? He told me. Who directed it? Sidney Pollack. Was he a character? Yes, he was. He told me. Running time, he told me. Then I said, and what do you think of it as a movie? He said, I don't know. Never seen it. I thought, they're not normal. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, so we just listened to the clip from Sir Terry about when sort of embarrassing things happen on the radio or you lose your cool on the radio, it's going out live. Obviously, you're on Strictly. You've sort of had a coping mechanism for that as well, going out live. But sort of both of them, what do you do if a story comes on that is rude and inappropriate, has to be shut down, or you just sort of lose your cool, forget what to say, have sort of hysterics overcome you? How do you sort of overcome that and move on live radio?
I'm trying to think of occasions where, I mean, we've had certainly things where we've got into legal trouble, and the most dangerous thing is to ever make a comment on an ongoing court case or to have a listener make one. So, you know, I mean, I had one, oh God, I could get it out of here, but it's, the guy was going, I mean, this is terrible, these show business people who've been involved in sexual cases. I mean, you take that guy who's still on the TV, sir. I don't know what he was about to say, you know. I said, no, please don't say it, you know. I thought, well, we came within a millimeter there. I didn't even know what name he was about to say, but it would have brought the whole station to a halt. But, yeah, I mean, the funny thing about, let's go back to Terry for a second, is the calmness when actually you think that this business of broadcasting live is sort of explosive on the nervous system a bit. I mean, it's not a natural thing for someone to say there's a microphone there, and when it goes live, there's 2 million people on the other end. That's not really natural. It's like being on the stage times 500. And I think Terry made it normal. And I had this experience, because I was on Strictly, where, and I was talking to Katie Durham about this, she was brilliant on it, but we were not ready for the moment it started. I mean, we just had no concept of what that was going to be like. So we practiced dancing, and I had this amazing woman I was dancing with called Karen Clifton, who was like an angel. I think actually she probably was an angel. And we, you know, when it starts, I mean, firstly, we did the rehearsal, and I had to, she was going to throw her leg up in the air, and I was supposed to catch it like that, like kind of like that, and she was going to be in the split, the vertical splits, and I dropped her leg in the rehearsal, and she fell over. And I said, look, obviously we need a plan B. If that happens on the air, can we sort of pretend it's part of the dance? She said, no, you got to catch the leg, okay? So I said, okay. And as we stood on the balcony, I was with Katie, and we were watching Helen George did a dance that was like just walking on air. I just said, oh my God, we're in trouble here. And you can't describe the moment when this bloke called Alan says, all right, Jeremy, 5 seconds, 4, 3, and then it goes, and now dancing the cha-cha-cha, Jeremy Vine and Karen Clifton. And the band, which is about 20 instruments behind Dave Arch, starts. It's like your hair blows forwards, you know. The audience went completely and utterly nuts. I mean, some of them were screaming. I could barely even hear. And all I could remember was this German choreographer had come to try to help me with some of the moves. And he said, just try to get 1 extra millimeter between your head and your shoulders, 1 millimeter. And I had this thought in my head. And it was like I was running out of a burning house. That's what the dance looked like when I looked at it back, you know. And of course, then I got completely smashed by the judges. You know, Craig said, you know, you would not even get booked for the National Dad Dancing Championships in Devon with that. But somehow, because of the genius of this Karen woman, we stayed in, you know, and she was, I mean, I'd have to use bad language to sort of describe what she said all the time, because she was very, very kind of fierce with me. Where she said, I mean, during the waltz, you know, and bear in mind, this very graceful dance, you know, but my shoulders would always slip down. So she said, Jeremy, lock in that fucking shit. I thought, okay, wasn't quite expecting that, you know. And she was amazing. If you watch Strictly, you'll know, to me, she is the dancer. And we became really friendly. It was lovely. But as I say, Katie and I, Carol Kirkwood and I, we hit the dance floor. We couldn't feel our legs. And so I wouldn't claim to have the Wogan cool in that situation. My goodness, I've never been in a situation like it. And going back to your brilliant question at the back about the graphics, what really made me laugh, because Strictly is completely different territory for me. And I don't know what, I did it because I got 2 young daughters. And they kept saying, if they ask, they're 9 and 11, they love the show, and I made the mistake of telling them that I'd said no to Strictly 3 times. And they said, if they ask you again, Daddy, you must say yes. So I was kind of in a complete corner. And the very first dance, they said, okay, Jeremy, what we've done, we've put you in a sort of election situation. So I said, okay, sorry, run that past me again. Well, you're going to be dancing out of a polling booth. I said, okay. So we're in the Elstree studio. It's a very big studio. So they said, you're going to stand on the edge of the stage, and there's going to be a swingometer on the floor. So back to your graphics there that's going. You've then got to introduce the song September by making a political reference, but not mentioning any parties. So I thought I've now gone through to the 3rd dimension. I literally did not understand anything of what I've just been told. So I had to say, so what I did was I stood there, and again, I have to say, this is, once they say you're on, it's 10 million people live. There's no second chance. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, here is the swingometer. Oh, but it's only 16%. I wonder if that will be different in September, which is the song. The music starts, I look round, and Karen, the polling station curtain opens, and Karen starts coming out like this, And I have to take my jacket off and throw it, and I can't even remember the rest of it, to be honest. But I did think, I just remember laughing as I went down, and there's a picture of me just going, for some reason I just shouted "core" out. During the minute, she had to kind of drop to her haunches in front of me, and I just went, "Core!" like that. I don't know, there's a lovely photo of me do that. So I think I enjoyed it. And I made the probably mistake of trying to give advice at the beginning. I can't even remember what my advice was, and you should ignore it all. But the best thing that happened there was Carol Kirkwood, the weather, you know Carol, right? The weather person. The weather person and I really bonded because we both felt we couldn't dance. And we also feel that we're not really famous like the other people. And so we thought we are out in weeks 1 and 2. And we both thought, well, have we been stitched up here or what? Because there are brilliant dancers and everything. As it happened, we all became friends and it was all great. But Carol, we were watching these dancers from the balcony. And I said to Carol, oh my God, this is terrible. How are we going to get through this? We're out. And she said, we're just going to have to enjoy it. And I think that's such a great line for life, Okay, so we were under pressure. We're just going to have to enjoy it. And in the end, she enjoyed it so much, nobody wanted her to leave. She was in for 7 weeks. I was in for 8. I only left 2 weeks before the god, Peter Andre. So I realized she had nailed it. And that line of hers, we're just going to have to enjoy it, is a perfect way for me to finish, because I think that is what it's all about, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much.